Fernando Monterd was sitting at a reserved table in a corner of the most elegant restaurant in the city of Petropolis. Outside, the rain was pouring down, and thick window panes vibrated with the impact of each drop, creating a steady melody that accompanied the soft murmur of conversations around them. He tried to concentrate on the menu, but his mind wandered, trapped in memories of a past he had tried to bury. That night, however, something unexpected was going to happen. It was as if fate had decided to strike a blow at the moment when he least expected it. 20 years had passed since the great love of his life, Maria, had left in a tragic and painful way. Since then, Fernando had not been the same. He closed his heart to love and immersed himself in work, trying to escape from a loneliness that tormented him every day. On that particular night, however, he felt a strange foreboding, something he couldn't explain. As he looked up from the menu, his eyes fell on one of the waitresses walking around the room. The instant he saw it, he felt how he was short of breath and the glass in his hands was about to slip. The young woman, with graceful and confident steps, had a face that he would recognize anywhere, even after 2 long decades. It was as if Mary, his late wife, was there, alive, in the flesh, standing in front of him. The same eyes, the same gesture on the face, the same bearing, and even the way she walked reminded her of Mary. Fernando felt his heart beat wildly and, unable to help himself, he called one of the waiters in a trembling voice. "That waitress," he said, pointing discreetly to the young woman. "What is its name?" The waiter, somewhat surprised by the question, looked in the direction indicated and answered quickly. "Ah, she's Roberta, sir. He started working here a few months ago." The name didn't tell him anything, but Fernando couldn't take his eyes off her. The image of Mary haunted him and, along with it, questions and memories that seemed to emerge from the depths of his memory. Unable to control the impulse, he raised his hand and called Roberta to his table. The young woman approached with a polite smile, although a slight confusion could be read in her eyes. "Good evening, sir. Can I help you with anything?" he asked in a soft, warm voice, a voice that sent a shiver down Fernando's spine. "Yes, of course." Fernando hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "I would like to know a little more about you. Your name is Roberta, right?" Roberta raised an eyebrow, surprised by the unusual question, and nodded politely. "Yes, my name is Roberta. Any problems, sir?" She looked around, perhaps worried that she had made some mistake. Fernando shook his head, regaining control of himself. "No, not at all. It's just that, you remind me a lot of someone I met many years ago," Fernando said, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Have you been working here for a long time?" Roberta shook her head, with a slight smile that hid a sadness. "No, not really. I started recently. I've always had to work in places like that, you know. I was raised in an orphanage and never met my biological parents, so I've had to fend for myself since I was young." Those words hit Fernando like a fist in the stomach. An orphanage. The possibility that this young woman could be his lost daughter, the baby Mary was carrying in her womb when she disappeared, took his breath away. He hid the emotion as best he could and continued the conversation, trying to look natural. "It must have been hard to grow up without a family," he said, trying to hide his growing interest and the whirlwind of emotions that overwhelmed him. Roberta shrugged, as if her reality was nothing new to her. "Yes, but you get used to it, don't you? It's part of life." Fernando looked at her face for a moment, seeing the same flash of melancholy that he once saw in Maria. From that moment on, Fernando knew that his life would never be the same again. There was something about Roberta that attracted him, a sense of familiarity and sadness that he couldn't ignore. As she walked away to wait for another table, he felt something inside him, something that had been dormant for years, begin to awaken. It was a remote possibility, a barely visible hope, but it was enough to make him make a decision. What if Roberta really was his daughter? What if fate was offering him a second chance, a way to redeem what he had lost? For the rest of the dinner, Fernando barely tasted the food. His mind was absorbed in this young woman and in the questions he could not stop asking himself. As he left the restaurant, he took one last look at Roberta, who moved between the tables with the same elegance that Maria had. He knew that this meeting had not been a simple coincidence. Something bigger was at stake, something he needed to discover, even if it meant opening wounds that had never healed. The days that followed the first meeting with Roberta were a whirlwind of emotions for Fernando. Every image of the young woman, every word she had said to him, was repeated in his mind like a movie he couldn't stop watching. His resemblance to Maria, his history of being raised in an orphanage, and the possibility that she was his daughter consumed him, leaving less and less room for his daily activities. I couldn't help but think of the idea that, after 20 years of emptiness and loneliness, this young woman might be the light I had been looking for so long. So, unable to resist the growing urge to get closer to her, he returned to the restaurant on several occasions, looking for any opportunity to talk to Roberta without seeming intrusive. She, for her part, was always cordial and professional, although she began to notice that this regular customer seemed to have a special interest in her life. One night, when the restaurant was quieter and Roberta finally had a moment of rest, Fernando took the opportunity to call her back to his table. This time, determined to make her a proposal that he had been planning for days, he waited for her with his heart beating at full speed, trying to control the mixture of nerves and excitement that invaded him. Roberta approached, surprised to see him once again in the restaurant, but she gave him the same professional smile as always. "How can I help you tonight, Mr. Monterd?" he asked, in a friendly tone, although there was a slight bewilderment in his eyes. Fernando took a deep breath before answering. "Roberta, I've been thinking about what you told me the other time, about your life, and I don't know how to say this without seeming nosy, but I've been reflecting." He paused and continued. "Have you ever thought about changing jobs? Trying something different?" Roberta's expression clearly showed her surprise. Although grateful, she could not understand why a man like him, so distinguished and obviously well-to-do, would be so interested in helping her. "Actually, sir, this is the job I need to be able to cover my expenses. I don't have many options, and while it may not be the ideal job, it's something I can do well and keep going," she replied, lowering her gaze briefly before turning her eyes back to Fernando's. "Why do you ask?" Fernando, trying to make his tone sound natural, folded his hands on the table and continued. "I think you have potential, Roberta. It seems to me that you are a hard-working person and that, with the right opportunity, you could improve your situation. That's why I want to offer you a job as my personal assistant." The proposal was like an unexpected lightning bolt in Roberta's life. She froze, trying to process his words, and for a few seconds silence reigned between them. "Personal assistant," he murmured at last, almost not believing his ears. "But, Mr. Monterd, I have no experience in that type of work, and you hardly know me." "I don't understand why Fernando interrupted her gently, leaning a little towards her so that she could perceive her sincerity. "Sometimes, Roberta, it's not a matter of experience. I see something special in you, and I think you deserve a chance to change your life. In addition, you would have all the necessary support to learn and adapt. It would be a very different position than the one you have here, with a higher salary and some additional benefits. Think about what you could achieve." Roberta was silent, clearly bewildered, but also tempted by the proposal. He couldn't ignore the possibility of a better life, away from the constant hardships he'd faced throughout his life. "It's a very generous offer, Mr. Monterd, but I need time to think about it," she said finally, trying to gain some space to assimilate what he proposed. "I don't want to make such an important decision without considering everything." Fernando nodded, giving her the space she needed, although inside he felt a mixture of anxiety and hope. "Of course, Roberta. Take the time you need. I'll be here, waiting for you," he said, in a tone that hid the urgency he felt. She knew that this opportunity could be the key to finding out the truth about Roberta and confirming if she was really her daughter. That night, Roberta returned to her small apartment with her head full of thoughts. As she prepared a simple dinner, her mind wandered through the halls of that elegant restaurant where she had met the man who seemed so determined to help her. "I thought about how strange it was that someone like Fernando Monterd, a successful man with no apparent worries, should be interested in his well-being and willing to offer him a way out of his situation. On the other hand, the offer was tempting. The possibility of a different job, of changing her life and leaving behind the insecurity she had always felt, was an opportunity that, in her heart, she could not ignore. The days passed and Fernando kept the expectation, waiting for the phone to ring at any moment. Every call she received made her heart skip a beat, thinking that maybe it would be Roberta with a definitive answer. He tried to concentrate on his work, on the commitments he had, but the idea that Roberta could be his daughter and that he could finally know the truth about his past kept him in constant turmoil. Finally, a week after their conversation at the restaurant, Fernando received a call that took him out of his thoughts. It was Roberta's voice, a little trembling, but firm. "Mr. Monterd, I've thought a lot about their offer, and, well, I think I'll accept. I feel like I don't have much to lose and that maybe it's an opportunity that won't come up again." Fernando felt an indescribable relief when he heard her words. "There was nothing I wanted more than to have Roberta around, to know more about her life, and over time, to unravel the mystery of their connection. Thank you, Roberta." You won't regret it, I promise. Tomorrow we could meet to discuss the details and help you organize yourself in your new position, he said, his tone betraying the mix of emotions that overwhelmed him. When he hung up the phone, Fernando felt that he had just taken the first step on a journey that could change everything. I knew that this path would not be easy and that there were still many questions to be answered, but at that moment, I was certain that I was a little closer to discovering the truth. And he also felt, for the first time in a long time, that he had a new reason to keep going, a hope that made his heart beat with a strength he thought he had lost forever. Fernando waited in his office with a mixture of anxiety and excitement as he waited for Roberta's arrival. He could not ignore the possibility that this young woman, who in so short a time had awakened such deep feelings in him, was really his daughter. He had promised himself that he would stay calm, that he would give her time to adjust, and that he wouldn't ask questions that might scare her, but he couldn't help but feel in a whirlwind of emotions. When she arrived, Roberta observed every corner with a mixture of admiration and nervousness. The opulence of the office, the elegant furniture and the atmosphere of authority that Fernando exuded made her feel out of place, but at the same time they aroused in her an indescribable curiosity. "Roberta, welcome." "Thank you for coming," Fernando said with a warm smile, trying to make her feel more comfortable. "Thank you, Mr. Monterd. I don't know if this is right for me, but I'm willing to try," Roberta replied, still with a tone of doubt in her voice. Fernando looked at her with silent pride and nodded with a gesture. "I trust you'll do a great job, Roberta. And I want you to know that I'm here to help you every step of the way." During the first days, Fernando dedicated himself to teaching her the simplest tasks and introducing her to the basics of her work. Roberta, for her part, was diligent, although she still seemed a little uncomfortable in this environment. However, as the days passed, the two began to share moments of silence, glances that revealed an inexplicable connection and a strange sense of familiarity that even they could not fully understand. One afternoon, while they were organizing old documents of the company, Fernando stopped at a photograph that he had kept among the papers. It was an image of his beloved Mary, smiling brightly on one of those happy days they shared together. Nostalgia enveloped him and, without realizing it, it caught the attention of Roberta, who observed the photograph with interest. "She was someone important to you?" Roberta asked, pointing to the image cautiously. Fernando took a deep breath, as if he was gathering strength before answering. "Yes, it was my wife, Maria. He paused, trying to control the emotion. "She passed away many years ago, and I still feel her absence every day." Roberta, surprised by the sincerity and pain she perceived in his words, decided to be honest with him as well. "It must have been very hard. I didn't know my biological parents, I was raised in an orphanage, and I sometimes wonder if I ever felt anything like what you feel now, as if a part of me was always incomplete." Fernando felt those words resonate within him in a devastating way. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, and the possibility that Roberta really was his lost daughter made the weight of the years and the sadness he had felt since Maria's disappearance even deeper and more meaningful. However, he knew that he had to proceed cautiously. "It's strange, Roberta. Sometimes fate puts us on paths we would never imagine." He tried to sound carefree, though inside his heart was pounding. "I would like, if you will allow me, to help you find answers about your past, about your family." Roberta looked at him in surprise, not knowing what to answer. He had never imagined that someone like him could be interested in his life and his story in such a personal way. "Why would you do that, Mr. Monterd?" he asked with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. Fernando hesitated for a moment, thinking of the right words to express what he felt without overwhelming her. "Because I think we all deserve to know where we come from, Roberta. And you, more than anyone else, deserve to have the opportunity to know your story." Those words echoed in Roberta's heart. Although she still felt bewildered, she sensed a sincerity in Fernando's eyes that made her feel, for the first time in a long time, that she was not alone, that perhaps there was someone who really cared about her. The next day, Fernando decided to investigate further, going through old records in search of any clues that could confirm what he feared and wanted so much at the same time, that Roberta was actually his daughter. His suspicions grew stronger and stronger when he found an incomplete adoption record in an orphanage that coincided with the year Maria had disappeared. With each discovery, she felt she was closer to a truth that would change her life forever. Meanwhile, Roberta was also beginning to notice something strange about Fernando's behavior. Although he was kind and respectful, there was an intensity to him that I couldn't explain, as if every interaction with her had a deeper purpose. One afternoon, unable to contain his curiosity, he decided to ask him directly. "Mr. Monterd, why are you doing all this for me?" He hardly knows me, and yet he seems so interested in my well-being. I don't get it. Fernando, taken by surprise, was silent for a few seconds, torn between the truth and the fear of frightening her. But, in the end, he opted for an honest, if cautious, answer. It's true, Roberta, you may not understand. But I feel that there is something that connects us in a way that even I cannot explain. And I can't ignore that feeling, not after everything I've been through. Roberta watched him carefully, trying to read between the lines, and finally, she nodded silently, deciding to trust him, although she still did not fully understand his intentions. The days continued, and the bond between them deepened. Fernando felt that he was recovering something that he had lost a long time ago, something that he did not even know he still needed. And Roberta, for the first time, felt that she had found a place where she was valued, a place where she could be herself, without fear of being rejected. As time went by, Fernando became more convinced that Roberta was his daughter. And while there were still unanswered questions and shadows of the past to unearth, he was determined not to let that chance for redemption slip through his fingers. Days later, Fernando was more restless than ever. The clues he had uncovered brought him closer and closer to the truth about Roberta, but many questions remained unanswered. The night before, he had spent hours reviewing old documents, especially those that kept traces of his life with Maria. With each page, he relived the love and loss he had never overcome. Finally, he made a decision that worried him, but that he felt was inevitable. He should tell Roberta his suspicions. That afternoon, while Roberta was working in the office, Fernando approached with a seriousness that made her stop what she was doing. I felt in his eyes that something important was about to be said. Roberta, I want us to take some time to talk. There's something I have to tell you, something I've been trying to find a way to express myself to you for days, Fernando began, visibly nervous. Roberta looked at him with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. I had never seen him so vulnerable. What is it, Mr. Monterd? He asked, feeling that this conversation could change everything. Fernando took a deep breath and asked her to sit down. Then, he settled in front of her, observing her face with a mixture of tenderness and anxiety. I know this may sound strange, but since I met you, I felt a special connection. As if I knew you before, as if you were destined to be in my life in a way that I didn't yet understand. Roberta felt a knot in her stomach. Those words were intense, and a small part of her feared what she was about to hear. Roberta, many years ago, I lost someone I loved deeply. My wife, Maria, was pregnant when she passed away, or at least, that's what I always believed. His death left an immense void in my life, a void that until now, I believed I could never fill. Fernando paused, fighting his emotions. But there is something that I have discovered in these last few days, something that could change everything. I found documents that suggest my daughter might have survived, and, his voice trembled a little. And I think it could be you, Roberta. Roberta felt the air disappear from her lungs. His mind was trying to process those words, but it was hard to take in something so unexpected and profound. Endless questions began to flood his mind, and an indescribable emotion began to grow inside him. Your daughter? But how is this possible? He asked incredulously, looking at Fernando with eyes full of confusion and surprise. I know, it seems incredible, but I found records that coincide with the time when Maria disappeared. That's when you were registered in an orphanage. It all comes together in a way I can't ignore, Fernando explained, trying to convey to him the security he himself needed to feel. We still need to confirm a few things, but I felt like I had to be honest with you. Roberta remained silent, trying to take in what she had just heard. A mixture of emotions came over her, confusion, hope, disbelief, but also a warm feeling that she had never felt before. If all this is true, if I really am your daughter, she said quietly, as if talking to herself. Why was I left in an orphanage? Why did I never know anything? Fernando lowered his gaze, feeling guilty despite not having known of its existence until now. Roberta, if you're really my daughter, I want you to know that I would never have left you. I would never have allowed you to grow up without knowing your parents. All of this has been a tragedy for me, and if it turns out that you are my daughter, all I want now is to make up for lost time. Roberta's eyes filled with tears when she heard those words. For years she had lived with the uncertainty of her origin, and now, in front of her, the possibility opened up that she had had a family all that time, a family that had also suffered from her absence. So what do we do now? She asked in a trembling voice, looking up to meet Fernando's eyes. Fernando took her hand tenderly, trying to instill calm and determination in her. I think the first thing we should do is confirm this suspicion. It's an important step, but I want you to know that no matter the outcome, I'll always be here for you. I'm not going to leave you alone anymore." Roberta nodded, still in shock, but with a strange sense of relief knowing that she would no longer be alone in the search for her identity. She felt that, no matter what, she had found in Fernando someone who really cared about her, someone who was willing to support her without reservation. That same afternoon, Fernando arranged an appointment to take the DNA test that could confirm his suspicions. While waiting for the day of the exam, the two began to spend more time together, sharing stories and memories that mostly belonged to Fernando, but which Roberta listened to with fascination. As I got to know him more, I felt a growing admiration for this man who had dedicated his life to business, but who, behind the facade of a successful businessman, was a human being marked by pain and loss. For Roberta, each of Fernando's stories was a piece of a puzzle that, in some way, seemed to have a place in her own life. She began to recognize traits and details that she had never understood about herself, but that now made sense when she learned of their possible origin. Finally, the day of the exam arrived. Fernando and Roberta showed up at the clinic, both with their hearts beating with nerves and hope. Fernando held her hand tightly as they waited their turn, conveying a silent support that Roberta gratefully accepted. "No matter what the result says, Roberta, I want you to know that you are already part of my life. I don't need proof to know that you are important to me." Roberta looked at him tenderly, grateful for his sincerity and kindness. At that moment, she understood that, no matter what the result said, Fernando had begun to occupy a special place in her life. The wait became eternal, and during those days, both continued with their lives trying not to think about the possibility that the result would be negative. For Fernando, the fear that Roberta was not his daughter was a constant concern, but he also repeated that, no matter the outcome, he was determined to continue supporting her. For Roberta, the days were filled with conflicting thoughts and emotions. He had never imagined that his life would take such an unexpected turn, but now, with Fernando's support, he felt that no matter what happened, he had gained a family in it. The days following the DNA test were filled with anxiety for both of them. Each day that passed was an endless wait and a mixture of emotions. Roberta tried to distract herself in her new position as Fernando's personal assistant, arranging meetings, managing documents, and familiarizing herself with the fast pace of the business world. However, her mind kept wandering to the same thought: was she really Fernando's daughter? For his part, Fernando, while trying to focus on his responsibilities, found it difficult to focus on anything other than the impending revelation. From time to time, he would stop by Roberta's desk and watch her closely. Every detail, every gesture, every smile of hers made him think of Maria, his late wife, and the love they had shared. Doubt and hope were woven into his heart, struggling within him as he waited for the answer that could change their lives forever. One afternoon, while they were reviewing some documents together, Fernando broke the silence. "Roberta, I know this has been a long and complicated process. I want to thank you for the patience and fortitude you have shown during this time. Whatever happens to the results, I want you to know that I'm here for you," he said in a sincere and affectionate tone. Roberta looked at him, noticing the twinkle in his eyes and the weight of his words. "Thank you, Fernando. The truth is, all this has been a roller coaster of emotions for me. I never imagined that I would be able to find someone who would offer me a family, a place to belong. But sometimes I hesitate," he paused, as if he didn't want to admit his fears out loud. "I fear that all this will end up being a dream, and that when I wake up, none of this will be real." Fernando looked at her tenderly and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens, none of this is a dream. You are here, with me, and nothing and no one will be able to erase that. I'm scared too, but it's a risk I'm willing to take if it means giving yourself the place you deserve in my life." Fernando's words seemed to calm Roberta's heart, and she smiled shyly and nodded, feeling comforted. That night, upon arriving at her small apartment, Roberta couldn't help but go over every detail of the conversation. She remembered how she had always wanted to have a family, a place where she felt loved and protected. And now, despite the doubts, he felt that life was finally giving him a chance to achieve that dream. The next day, both were summoned to the clinic to receive the results. The tension in the air was palpable, and as they waited in the room, Roberta felt her heart pounding. Fernando remained by his side, transmitting a tranquility that helped him to stand firm. Finally, a nurse told them that the doctor was waiting for them in his office. Upon entering, the doctor offered them a professional smile and a folder with the results in hand. "Mr. Monterd, Miss Roberta, I appreciate your patience in this process. The results we have here are conclusive, and I think they will give you the answers you are looking for," he said as he opened the folder and handed them the report. Fernando took the document and, after looking at it for a few seconds, he felt a great emotion invade him. It was true, the DNA confirmed that Roberta was his daughter. Tears began to gather in his eyes as he looked at Roberta, who, seeing her reaction, didn't need to read the report to understand the outcome.
So, it's true?
Roberta asked in a thin voice, her eyes full of surprise and happiness. Fernando nodded and hugged her tightly, as if he never wanted to let her go. It was a moment of deep emotion for both of them, a reunion that seemed to heal the wounds of so many years of pain and loneliness. Roberta, you're my daughter. You are the daughter I always thought I had lost and that I have found again. I can't explain what I feel right now, but I promise you that, from today on, nothing will separate us, said Fernando, as he stroked his daughter's hair. Roberta, with tears in her eyes, returned the embrace. After a lifetime of questions and disappointments, he had finally found the answer he had been looking for. It was a moment she never imagined she would live, and she felt a deep peace knowing that she had finally found her father. That day, when they returned home, Fernando and Roberta decided to share a quiet dinner to celebrate the beginning of this new stage. During the meal, Fernando told her about his childhood, his dreams, and told her anecdotes about his mother, Maria, that made her laugh and cry. Roberta listened to each story with a mixture of wonder and joy, as if each word revealed to her a little piece of her own identity, an identity she had always longed to know. Your mother was an extraordinary woman, Roberta. He always wanted to give you the best, and although he couldn't be with you physically, I'm sure he would be very happy to see us together today, said Fernando, moved. Roberta smiled, feeling that each story brought her closer to a mother she had never met but now felt like a presence in her life. For the first time, she felt complete, as if her past, which had always been a shadow, was now beginning to fill with light. That night, Fernando and Roberta said goodbye with a warm and sincere embrace. Both knew that the road ahead would not be easy and that there were still many wounds to heal. But, finally, they could walk together as father and daughter, rebuilding a relationship that fate had taken from them but that they were willing to recover. With a heart full of hope, Roberta returned to her apartment, knowing that her life had changed forever. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the future. She had found her place in the world, and she was willing to face any challenge that came her way, knowing that she now had a family, a father, and a bond that nothing and no one could break. With the bond between Fernando and Roberta strengthened and the certainty of their kinship confirmed, it seemed that things would begin to calm down. However, the tranquility was short-lived. The day after the celebration of his new beginning, Fernando received a disturbing call. It was the detective he had hired to investigate the orphanage's files. He had found something else. Mr. Monterd, I know you've already confirmed that Roberta is your daughter, but there's something in the records that I think you need to see. There are documents that mention frequent visits to the orphanage by someone very close to you, the detective said gravely. Fernando, phone in hand, felt the calm he had managed to regain begin to crumble. She immediately thought of Felipe, her brother-in-law, who had always been close to Maria before her disappearance. Felipe had been a support, someone who seemed to be loyal and reliable, but the pieces didn't fit together now. With his heart racing, Fernando arranged a meeting with the detective that same night. Roberta, seeing her father's expression, couldn't help but ask, "Dad, is everything okay?" "He seems worried," he asked in a tone of uneasiness. Fernando turned to her, trying to hide the worry in his eyes. "It's nothing to worry about, Roberta. Only matters from the past that I need to clarify. But I want you to know that no matter what, we're in this together," he said, giving her a reassuring smile. That night, in the encounter with the detective, Fernando was confronted with a disturbing truth. There was evidence that Felipe had been involved in the process of registering Roberta at the orphanage. Moreover, he had signed documents indicating that he had known Roberta's identity for a long time and that he had done everything he could to keep her away from Fernando. Fernando felt a mixture of anger and sadness. His brother-in-law, someone he had fully trusted, had been the architect of the separation between him and his daughter. The betrayal struck him like a slap in the face, and Mary's words in the letters came back to his mind, reminding him of the distrust she felt towards Philip. His heart pounded as he recalled the warnings he'd ignored at the time. Determined to confront him, Ferdinand returned home and spent the night awake, thinking about how to confront Philip. He knew that his brother-in-law would deny everything if he didn't have solid evidence, but he also understood that he now had enough to launch an official investigation and bring the weight of the law to his knees. The next day, Fernando waited for Roberta to leave for work to call Felipe and ask them to meet in his office. "Felipe, I need you to come to my office this afternoon. There's something I need to discuss with you, something very important," Fernando said in a firm voice. "Philip, not knowing that he was about to face the consequences of his actions, accepted without asking questions. Hours later, in Fernando's office, the atmosphere was tense. Felipe arrived with his usual carefree smile, but Fernando looked at him without emotion, his eyes full of disappointment. "What do you want to discuss, Fernando?" Felipe asked in a casual tone. Fernando held the documents the detective had given him and held them out to his brother-in-law. "I want you to explain this to me, Felipe. I want to know why your signature appears in the orphanage's records, authorizing Roberta's entry when Maria disappeared. What have you been hiding all these years?" he asked, his voice trembling with pent-up fury. Felipe's smile disappeared when he saw the papers. His hands began to tremble slightly, and he tried to give an explanation, but Fernando was unwilling to listen to excuses. "Don't tell me it was a misunderstanding. Don't tell me you don't know what it means. You knew Roberta was my daughter. Why did you hide it from me? What did you gain from that?" Fernando raised his voice, unable to contain the mixture of sadness and anger. Philip, realizing that he could not get out of this situation easily, finally confessed. "I did it because I didn't want all the control of the family and the company to be in your hands, Fernando. I thought that without Maria and without a legitimate heiress, we could handle everything without interference. You don't understand. Maria was always the center of everything, and when she disappeared, I just wanted to make sure everything was under my control." Fernando listened to him in disbelief, feeling more and more betrayed. The coldness and calculation in her brother-in-law's words were something she had never imagined. "Roberta is your niece, Felipe. It's your own blood, and yet you decided to separate it from its family. You have no forgiveness for this, and I assure you that I will not let you get away with it." Philip, seeing that Ferdinand was determined to act, tried another tactic. "Fernando, we can solve it between us. This does not need to come to light. Think about it, what good is it for you now to open a wound that has been closed for 20 years? But Fernando had already made his decision. He knew that justice had to be done, not only for him and Roberta, but also for Maria's memory. He could no longer look at Philip in the same way, and it was clear that this confrontation would have consequences. "This is the end, Felipe. You've betrayed your own family, and I'm going to make sure you face the consequences of your actions. I will not allow Roberta to suffer any more for your lies." Without another word, Fernando left the office, leaving Felipe trapped in remorse and anger. "I knew that the next step would be to talk to Roberta and tell her the whole truth. It was painful, but I couldn't hide anything else from him. The decision was made, there would be no more secrets between them." After the harsh revelation about Philip and the betrayal he had endured for years, Ferdinand felt he could no longer delay the truth. Roberta deserved to know everything, without any more secrets or half-truths. That night, he decided to invite her to dinner at his house, a place where they could talk in private, away from the noise of work and the constant pressure that weighed on them. When Roberta arrived, she noticed a serious expression on Fernando's face and felt that something important was about to happen. "Dad, is something wrong?" Roberta asked, uneasy, as she left her coat on the chair. Fernando nodded, trying to find the right words. He had imagined many times what this moment would be like, but now that he was in front of him, the burden of emotions weighed on his soul. "Roberta, there's something you need to know about your mother, and about Felipe," Fernando began, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I have discovered things that have perplexed me, and I think it is time for you to know the whole truth." Roberta looked at him, her heart racing and a mixture of fear and hope. Ever since she had begun working with him, she had sensed that there were secrets from the past that had not yet been revealed to her, but she never imagined the magnitude of what she was about to hear. "Your mother, Maria. It disappeared in circumstances that we always thought were accidental, but in reality, it was something much darker. Felipe, my own brother-in-law, had a lot to do with it. He manipulated her, Roberta, with lies and deceit, until he managed to separate us. He wanted to control everything, even you." Fernando paused, observing his daughter's reaction. Roberta felt a chill in her chest. The idea that someone so close to the family could have orchestrated all that suffering seemed unthinkable to him, and at the same time, the reality of his words became apparent. "So, was he the one who took me away from you? Who made me grow up without knowing anything about my family?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Yes, Roberta. Felipe went out of his way to keep you away. Ever since you were a baby, he pulled strings so that no one could find you. He took advantage of everyone's pain to build his own benefit, not caring what it would cost you and me." Fernando took Roberta's hands in his, his eyes full of regret. Roberta looked at him, feeling how the pieces of her life fell into place little by little. She had grown up feeling alone, not understanding why no one had claimed her, why she had been abandoned. She now understood that it wasn't abandonment that had left her in the orphanage, but the ambition and betrayal of someone everyone trusted.
And he? Where is it now?
He asked, feeling a mixture of fury and sadness.
Felipe is in police custody.
With the help of a detective, we have gathered enough evidence to bring him to justice. But it's not over, Roberta. We still need to face the consequences of their actions, and I know this has affected you deeply. All I want is for you to find peace in your life and to know that I will always be here for you. Roberta felt the weight of Fernando's words, and although the pain of Felipe's betrayal was strong, there was also the relief of knowing that finally, someone had fought for her, that she was not alone. That night they continued talking about their mother, about the memories that Fernando kept of Maria. Every word, every anecdote, became a stronger bond between father and daughter, and Roberta began to feel a deeper connection with that woman she never knew but who influenced her life so much. Before saying goodbye, Fernando paused, watching Roberta with a mixture of pride and affection. Roberta, I know it's a lot to take in, and I don't expect everything to be solved overnight. But I want you to know that, despite everything, you can always count on me. We won't let the past haunt you any longer, he said in a firm voice, hugging her. Roberta, silently, clung to her father. She knew that life had put them through many trials, but in that moment she felt safe, as if she had finally found the place where she belonged. After facing the truth and Felipe being arrested, Roberta and Fernando felt that their lives could finally find a course of peace. But the echoes of the past were still latent in every corner of their home, and although the trial was underway, they both knew that they needed to close this chapter with one last conversation, a redemption that would allow them to move on. One afternoon, Fernando invited Roberta to walk through the gardens of the old family home, a place that had been her refuge for years and that, now, represented a new stage with her daughter. Roberta, still with the weight of what she experienced, accepted the invitation. They walked silently among the trees, letting the breeze refresh their thoughts and wipe away the scars that had marked their lives. Roberta, I want you to know that, although the memories of your mother are bittersweet, I am grateful that I met her and that she gave me the greatest gift of all, you, Fernando said, breaking the silence. Roberta looked at him, moved, and sighed deeply. There were so many questions in his mind, so many doubts about what the future would mean. Dad, how do you move on after all this? He asked, letting his feelings show in his voice. Fernando stopped and looked into her eyes, trying to convey the strength that he himself needed to find. We keep building something new, Roberta. Learning to live with shadows, without letting them dominate our lives. Today, the memory of your mother is stronger than the tragedy we experienced. She lives in you, and I have the opportunity to remember her through you. Those are the things that keep us going. Roberta nodded, trying to internalize her father's words. She knew that the wound was open, but Fernando's support gave her new hope. Together they had built something that not even Felipe's lies could destroy. In the days that followed, Fernando and Roberta dedicated themselves to reorganizing the family business. Now, every project, every decision, was made with the purpose of honoring Mary's legacy and building a just and honest future for both. They worked side by side, learning from each other and creating a relationship of trust that had been denied them for so long. One morning, Fernando called a meeting with all the employees. Roberta, who was reserved at first, took her place next to him, and when it was time to speak, Fernando encouraged her to do so. Today, we are here to begin a new stage. On behalf of my mother and father, I want you to know that this company, our company, is committed to being a place of transparency and respect. My mother always dreamed of this business being more than just a source of income, and we want to make that dream a reality, Roberta said, her voice firm and determined. The employees listened to her in silence, many moved by the strength that Roberta showed. At the end, everyone began to applaud, showing their support and respect for her and for the change she was promoting with Fernando. That night, back home, Roberta and Fernando sat in the living room, surrounded by photographs and memories that now seemed less painful. Fernando looked at his daughter with indescribable pride and offered her a glass of wine. For us, Roberta. For everything we have achieved and for what we are going to build together. For Mom, and for this new beginning, Dad, she replied, raising her glass and toasting to the memory of Mary and the future they were forging. The trial against Felipe took place weeks later, and both Fernando and Roberta were present in the courtroom, giving their testimonies and making sure that each of their lies and deceptions were exposed to justice. Eventually, Felipe was convicted, and the Vasconcelos family regained not only control of their property, but also the dignity that had been taken from them. As he left the courthouse, Fernando turned to Roberta and offered her his arm.
Come on, daughter. There's a world out there waiting for us.
And with a smile, they both walked away, ready to live a life free of secrets, certain that together they could overcome any obstacle that stood in their way.